Good morning, everyone. I see a few attendees are starting to hop on, so I'm just going to give it 1 minute for everyone who's been waiting in the waiting room to join us. Hello, my name is Shannon. I'm the founder of Bargain Homes Abroad. I host these webinars a couple of times a month for my membership, and we're doing things a little bit differently today, and we've opened it up to Adrian's audience as well. So for those of you who don't know me, hello, I'm here. So I just wanted to say a real quick, what started as a project, Bargain Homes Abroad is basically started as a project a couple of years ago when COVID started. And I am obsessed with looking on the internet and finding homes. And I decided, oh, one day I'm just going to curate them and put them on Instagram. It has since grown into 60,000 members, or not members, but audience and followers. And I started a membership and all that. So today I'm super excited to have Adrian Leeds join us. She needs no introduction. Everybody knows she's the star of any show on House Hunters International that takes place in Paris and sometimes Nice. So she really needs no introduction. So I'm going to turn it over to her. She's got a great talk today for us, kind of navigating French real estate 101, all the ins and outs of, if you're considering purchasing in France, why, where, how, that kind of thing. So welcome, Adrian. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, Shannon, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. There is one other person on our screen I'd like to introduce, and that's Patty Sadowskis. Patty is my right arm, and she's going to help monitor the questions. So for any of you who have questions, I'm sure you will, go ahead and put them in the, Patty, you wanted it in the Q&A, correct?
In the Q&A. Mm-hmm.
Q&A, and we're going to try to answer as many of your questions as possible during the session, and any that we can't answer, then maybe we can even be able to answer them later through my newsletters, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. But I guess I should go ahead and just get started with my presentation, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen and start this off. Here we go, but I want to start at the beginning. Okay. Navigating French Real Estate 101. This is a special presentation for Bargain Homes Abroad. Shannon, I do really appreciate that you've invited us here, and I hope this is going to be informative for everyone. So just a little bit about who we are. We are property consultants. We are real estate agents. We are licensed in France, but we primarily work for the buyer more so than for the seller. So we think of ourselves as French property the American way. Our services include consultation, property search for both rentals as well as for purchase. We do offer some sales and listings, which are only properties that we would recommend someone buy. We can also assist someone in either making a purchase or a sale. And we do appraisals. We offer financing resources, how to get a mortgage in France, and we have resources for renovating and decorating. So it's sort of soup to nuts, beginning to end. Now, the reason we exist is because there's no multiple listing service in France. Americans are really spoiled by this. When a property goes on the market, it's on the market at the same moment all over the United States, which means that it's available to everyone, all the agents and all the buyers. It's a pretty amazing thing that does not exist here, and it's why our clients need us to help them navigate the system. Now, the process is completely different. The laws are completely different. The language is completely different. The currency is different. You're dealing in a different culture. And quite honestly, everything you can imagine is different. So you can take whatever you know about US real estate and throw it away and start all over. We often get clients who say, oh, but, I've bought 5 homes in the United States, or I'm a real estate agent. And then they go into shock when they see how different the system is here. So it really takes having someone, even if it's not us, but someone help you navigate the process. So I don't know why choose France. I chose France 28 and a half years ago. I came on a 1-year sabbatical and basically never left. I contend that once you spend any time in France, you aren't ever going back, because France is just an amazing place to be. I mean, it's the center of Europe, which means you have access to all of Europe and beyond easily, quickly, inexpensively. You have this amazing beauty in architecture, landscaping, style, everything. I mean, when you think of France, don't you think of beauty? I know I do. And you've got culture. This is really a cultural mecca. The art, performing arts, creative arts, everything about it, the culture is very profound. So it's very rich. And on top of that, you have diversity. You have ethnic diversity, you have cityscapes, you have landscapes. You know, France is basically about the size of Texas. But inside that little space is just about everything the United States has in terms of landscape, weather, lifestyle, you name it, it's here. And of course, there is that joie de vivre, the idea that you don't, you work to live, you don't live to work. And there is time to relax and reflect. I don't know if you guys know this, but employers are obligated to give 5 weeks of paid vacation to every employee. And on top of that, there are 14 holidays. So there's plenty of time to enjoy your life and not just work yourself to death, which is another big benefit in France. But of course, you've got this amazing security. France offers, you know, excellent and inexpensive healthcare and employment and retirement benefits. There's a very big safety net in France, which makes it really desirable. And yes, the taxes for working people are high, but retirees from the US, for example, come to France and don't pay any tax, but still have all these benefits. So it's pretty amazing. There's also a very high quality level of education that is free for both children and adults. And the infrastructure in France, the excellent transportation systems that are sophisticated and inexpensive, and the communication systems are really, really worth taking a serious look at, because, you know, I don't know if you know about the TGV, the train à grande vitesse, the high-speed trains that take you all over France and Europe, and everywhere you look, you've got public transportation that's excellent, which means there are lots of places you don't need to own and operate a car. And so there are just a lot of benefits of living in France. One thing that's really interesting is how low property taxes are, which are about 1/10 of what they are in the US, shocking as that may seem, because we think of this as a high tax society, but property taxes are not one of them. And the carrying costs on a property are very low. I was just telling a client earlier today how their internet and their cable TV or satellite TV and their VoIP phone that's free to almost anywhere in the world is going to only cost them 35 euros a month instead of the $200 to $350 a month that you experience in the States. And that's just a small example of how the carrying costs can be much, much lower. Well, there's a lot of France to love. That's kind of our big problem. We love all of it. I think most Americans are familiar with Paris. We used to joke that the #1 American dream was to live in Paris. And it is a bit of a dream. It's a pretty fantastic, beautiful city. It's a very urban lifestyle. It does have a high cost of living. It's mostly property that makes it expensive, not everything else. In fact, you can pretty much live in France for about half of what it costs you to live in the United States, believe it or not. But Paris is a cultural mecca, and of course, it's the center of Europe, and you can get just about anywhere from there. Second to that on my list is Nice and the Riviera. That's the photograph in the upper right corner is actually a photo of Villefranche-sur-Mer and Cap Ferrat, which is just east of Nice. And it's the hub of the Riviera. It's an urban and suburban kind of lifestyle. You can have both. It's a more moderate cost of living because property in Nice is about half the cost of property in Paris. The Riviera is drop dead gorgeous. Patty lives in Nice. I spend about half my year in Nice. It has a wonderful public transportation system and 300 days of sunshine a year. It's just amazing. And I highly recommend it, especially for retirees. But then there's Provence, and everybody loves Provence, and Peter Mayle. We all know about A Year in Provence and what that was like for him. It's a classic story that turned into a movie and other things. Provence is a beautiful place. It is a more rural lifestyle. It is a moderate cost of living. There are some wonderful cities there like Aix-en-Provence, which, by the way, is only about a 30-minute drive to the Marseille airport, making it convenient. And it's a beautiful, elegant town. It does get pretty hot in the summer, whereas the Riviera actually stays relatively cool because it's on the water. Now, there are lots of other cities and provinces all over France, of course, which offer a combination of urban or suburban or rural lifestyles and a lower cost of living. On the lower left is a photo of Strasbourg, which is on the eastern border. And the photo on the right, lower right, is one of the beautiful hill towns in Provence. So how do you decide where to live? It's a big conundrum, because there's so much that France has to offer. This is my personal list, and you do with it what you will, but it's what I think makes or breaks a great place. I think for Americans, having a thriving American community makes it really easy to make friends, people you can commiserate with, you can get, you can make these friends very quickly. And I think it's important to have an American community around you. There are certain cities that have larger communities than others. Paris has a very large American community. Nice does, and Provence does. And Americans are all over the country, but those are the three primary areas that have the largest American communities. On top of that, I think it's really important to have fast and easy access to transportation. If you want to, live in Europe and visit all of Europe, then you need to be near an international airport or near a TGV hub, and have good local transportation. So for instance, you can fly to Venice for 70 euros round trip on EasyJet and go for the weekend if you're in Paris or Nice, and you can't do that as easily, as inexpensively from the States. So I personally believe having good transportation is a big plus. Then you might want to think about climate, where you're going to be most comfortable. If you're going to spend time in the north and northwest, you're going to have cooler, rainier seasons. Paris is, known to be cool and damp. When you go to the south, it can, Provence and the Côte d'Azur can be much warmer. The best weather in all of France is pretty much on the eastern Mediterranean. So that's from Marseille going east to Menton, to the Italian border. That's the best weather in the whole country. And it's not as hot as you might think because it's on the water. Well, then you might question whether you really want to be urban or rural, whether you want to live in an apartment or a village house or a house in the countryside. This is an opportunity for Americans who are used to living in their car bubble. And I say car bubble because you go from your house to your car, to the supermarket, back to your car, to the restaurant, back to your car, to the shopping center, back to your car. And you spend all of your time living in what we think of as a bubble. And you don't have to do that. In a lot of cities in France, you really can live without owning or operating a car and having everything at your toes. And I haven't owned a car in these 28 years, very, very happily, I might add. On top of that, AAA will tell you that to own and operate a car costs about $11,000 a year. So it's a huge savings not to have a car. And then you might consider, you know, what your cost of living is, what you can afford, and that would have a lot to do with where you decide to live. Paris is expensive. Property in Nice, for example, is half the cost. Property in Lille is 1/3 the cost. So if you're really on a budget, then that's going to be a big part of your decision making. If you're older, then access to good healthcare and hospitals could be at the top of your list. Healthcare, by the way, in this country is pretty amazing. It's been rated the #1 healthcare in the world by the WHO for many years. I just wrote an article recently about the overall ranking of the healthcare system here. It's very inexpensive and it's excellent. So if you don't want to be in a healthcare desert, you want to make sure that you're in probably more urban areas so that you have access to hospitals and not so far away by ambulance. The cost of healthcare here is about 1/10 of what it is in the United States. I could tell you stories all day long that are positive. I've had amazing experience with healthcare in France, so it's certainly not anything to be concerned about. I had friends write me recently and say, if you had a serious issue, would you go back to the States or would you stay in France? And I chuckled because I said there would be no way I would go back to the United States for healthcare under any circumstances, knowing how good it is here. So it's another big reason to be here. When you're deciding where to live, you also want to think about, you know, how good is your French? If you're in Paris or in Nice, you could probably exist your entire life without speaking much French at all because so many people speak English. If you're going to be in the countryside, you're definitely going to need at least a survival level of French and maybe higher than that. Learning French is not easy. It takes time to do. And the older you get, the more difficult it is. I am in the process of getting my citizenship, and I'm about to take a French test to qualify. And I can tell you I'm pretty nervous about it. And I'm taking lessons to get myself up to speed, because even after 28 years, I don't feel 100% comfortable, believe it or not. But I often advise people not to beat themselves up over it. Just do what they can do and relax with it. And if you're in, you know, if you're in any of the urban areas, you won't need the language quite as much as if you're in the countryside. Then another consideration, of course, is whether you want business opportunities or cultural activities and which are important to you or not. And these are all ways of helping to decide where you're going to land in France. So do you want a car or not? This photograph was taken in the center of Nice. It's Place Masséna. That is the tram. There are a couple of tramway lines that are fantastic. One of them goes from the airport to the old port. It takes about 30 minutes to go from one side to the other, and €1, that's all it costs. It's fast, it's easy, it's fabulous. So quite honestly, if you live in a city like that, you don't need to deal with a car, worry about parking it, filling it with gas or maintenance, and it really simplifies your life quite a bit. So what cities have the easiest travel access? The international airports in France, there are 4 of them. There are 2 in Paris. So one is Charles de Gaulle and the other is Orly. And then there's one in Marseille and one in Nice. The other airports on this list are regional airports in these cities, which means that you're going to hop from one place to another. So if you're in Bordeaux, for example, you really can't get that far from Bordeaux other than a few other cities in France and other cities in Europe. You'd have to go from Bordeaux to Paris or Nice to change for an international flight. But you can fly directly to the United States from any of those first 4 cities, Paris, Marseille, and Nice. Then there's the TGV, the high-speed train. It goes all over France. It goes into other parts of Europe. And it's quiet, it's fast, it's inexpensive, it's amazing. I go from Paris to Nice every couple of weeks. It takes 6 hours from Paris to Nice, and it's really TGV up until approximately Marseille. And then there is slower tracks between Marseille and Nice, but I don't mind because it's, as if you look at the map, it's along the water and the views are quite beautiful. So here's an idea of where it travels and what the timing is. You can get to London in 2 hours and 17 minutes. Can you believe that? On the Eurostar? It's fantastic. Amsterdam to Paris, 3 hours, 20 minutes. Brussels, not even an hour and a half. Marseille is a little over 3 hours. To Germany, to Cologne, another 3 hours, 20 minutes. And to Milan, it's a little longer, but it's really pleasant. And on the train has Wi-Fi, it has plugs, it has a kiosk where you can buy food, you can sit back, you can relax. I tend to work the entire time on my laptop and get a lot of stuff done, so I quite love the train. You don't have to go through security, you get on with your luggage, you can bring pretty much as you want. It's fantastic, really amazing. So the question is, what's affordable and where is it? These are price per square meter. Okay, so the first column is price per square meter for the average apartment. Column 2 is for a house. And the other 2 columns are rental on a per square meter basis. These are in euro value, not in dollar value, because everything we do is in euros, not in dollars. But if you just look at the left side of the chart, you'll see that Paris is clearly the most expensive. And then it goes down by half immediately. So cities like Lyon, which is a beautiful city, Nice, Bordeaux, they are much less expensive than Paris. And all the way down to Lille. Lille is a really interesting town. Most people don't think about it at all. It used to be a very industrial kind of place. It's very close to the Belgian border. And what's interesting about Lille, from my perspective, is that you have TGV access from Lille directly to London and Brussels and Amsterdam and Paris within a very short amount of time. And the people I know who live in Lille talk about how they can travel to all over the world and to the United States and choose which city they want to connect with, whether it's London or Paris or Brussels or Amsterdam, and they can get really good deals that way. So it gives them, it's a really good hub, even though it's a small city and it has a very large English-speaking population. So for those who need to be on a budget, it's a really interesting place to be. So I hope this is a bit helpful. Okay, these are my personal recommendations. I think Paris is top of the list. It's the most beautiful city in the world. There's just nothing quite like Paris. It's a very exciting, wonderful place to be. In spite of what you've probably seen going on there right now with all of the demonstrations against the retirement reforms, that makes it a very exciting place. I have to say that. I have heard good reports that the garbage is finally starting to get picked up. And so I hope that when I get back there on Friday, my neighborhood's going to be nice and clean and pretty. But second runner up to that for me is absolutely Nice and the Riviera. It's beautiful. It's inexpensive. The weather's gorgeous. It has a very large Anglophone and American community. And it's very easy to get around. And it's really not just Nice, it's really the entire Riviera. From Cannes all the way to Menton, which is on the Italian border, there's easy access into Italy. In 30 minutes, you can be in the Alps and be skiing. You can get on a ferry and go to Corsica. It's pretty amazing. So I like Nice a lot. Then after that, Aix-en-Provence, which is, again, a beautiful town in the middle of Provence. And what makes it wonderful, besides its large student population and its beauty, is the fact that it's 30 minutes to the Marseille airport. So that makes it easy to travel internationally. Aix is, of course, part of Provence, and Provence is a beautiful region. There are a lot of fabulous towns. There are a tremendous American population there, but you would need a car. And you expect to be driving all over, but of course the scenery is fabulous. As I said earlier, Lille is an interesting choice for all the reasons I talked about. And the other town that I like is Strasbourg. And the reason that I like Strasbourg is because at one time it was the seat of the EU, the European Union, and that makes it an international place. It has beautiful architecture and canals, and it's a very the only thing about Strasbourg is it can get cold. Otherwise, it's a beautiful place, and it's very close to the German border. So it has a lot of German culture to it. Now, just so you know, anyone can purchase property in France. You do not need to be a resident. You do not need to be a citizen. Anyone can come to France and buy property. There is no MLS. That's one of the things that makes it difficult, because every agent and agency has access only to its own listings, and they do not expect to split their commissions. Now, not in Paris. You can often have a split commission situation outside of Paris, and they build in about 5% into the asking price. So whenever you see the price of a property in France, it includes the agency commission. But what happens is that the agents themselves are very proprietary about their own listings. They don't want to share information. And as I said, they don't want to share their commissions. So they care only about selling the properties that they represent. And it's not that the agents will necessarily lie, but they're going to do what it takes to make a sale. So they may not tell you everything you need to know about a property. You may have to ask the right question to get the right answer. And again, this is kind of why we exist. So our primary service is finding property for you as the buyer and protecting you as the buyer. So we work with mortgage brokers who do specialize in the North American buyer, and financing is difficult, but possible to obtain. One of the reasons it's become so difficult is because of FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, which is part of the HIRE Act that was voted in 2010, places regulations on foreign financial institutions to report their US customers. And so there are now many banks that do not want to lend money to Americans, and they don't want to open bank accounts for Americans. So it is difficult, but it is possible. And the banks that are willing to lend to Americans prefer Americans who are under 60 years old. And there's a reason for that. It has to do with a life insurance policy. And they want their borrowers to be salaried, not self-employed. So it can get a little bit tricky. Your mortgage payment must not exceed more than 1/3 of your disposable income. But interest rates right now are still under 3%. So we find that the interest rates tend to be about half of what they are in the US. So if you can get a mortgage, it's really to your advantage to take one, but not just because of the interest rates, but for a variety of other reasons. And it gives you the ability to leverage and maybe buy a better property or buy more properties. So we can assist you with finding financing. So the process is simple. It takes 4 to 6 months from beginning to end, believe it or not, because you go through a lot of hoops. And that's another reason that we're here to help you. So what happens is The seller tends to only allow about 5% negotiation. So there's no, it's not like it is in the States at all. Okay, they really price a property very close to what they expect to get for it because there's no bidding wars. The seller is morally obligated to accept asking price, not legally, but morally. So if you offer the seller their asking price, they pretty much have to say yes. Now, the transaction is handled by a notaire, which is a kind of a lawyer, who manages all the entire process. And it means that they have to pull together a tremendous amount of documentation. And that alone takes about a month. After that, a pre-sale agreement is signed, which is called a promesse or a compromis de vente. And that is only signed after all the due diligence is done, which is something we help you do. And a 10% deposit is put down and held in escrow by the lawyer, by the notaire. Believe it or not, you are still at that point not obligated to buy the property. You have a 10-day cooling off period within which you can fully retract your purchase. So there's a lot of consumer protection built in, and that's why this process takes such a long time. Then you need to allow between 2 and 4 months for the signature between the pre-sale agreement and the final deed, which is called an acte de vente. So that's why I said it takes about 4 to 6 months. You cannot really effectively flip a property. There's a lot of decision-making involved. It takes a long time, but they dot their I's, they cross their T's, and it's risk-free because you really know what you're getting into, and the notaire is culpable for any of those mistakes. So it replaces what we know as title insurance completely. So the reason we're here is because we protect your interests. We will search for the property on behalf of the renter or the buyer. We provide all the resources, all the professionals you might need in order to make the right decisions. We do the due diligence. Remember, you're dealing in documents that are in French. You don't need to have them translated. We're going to do all that work for you. We're going to advise along the way. We're going to manage the process from beginning to end. And I like to think of it as a kind of insurance because we will not let our client make a bad decision. Now, you can probably hire someone else and tell them that you want to buy this kind of house in this location, and they will just go off and do it. And I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask why. And we're going to find out if that really makes sense for you or not. So we are much more than just agents that are willing to go out there and find the property for you. We really are advisors and counselors, and we can help you to go from just this idea of moving to France to actually making it a reality. And besides that, we do some other things. I write 3 nouvelles lettres, which means newsletter in French, a week. I coined that phrase. It's a registered trademark. You can subscribe. It's free of charge. You can unsubscribe at any time, but we provide a lot of information. Of course, we've done more than 50 House Hunters International episodes since 2006. I hope you've seen some of them. We also offer a coffee gathering for our clients and our readers to participate in once a month in Paris, every other month in Nice. We call it après-midi. We always have a speaker. It's always fun and interesting. So you can find out when that's happening in any of our newsletters or on our website. And the way this starts is by booking a personal or group consultation with me so that you can really figure out what direction to take. And another great way of learning things is just to participate in webinars such as this one. We have one upcoming event, which is the North American Expats in France Quarterly Financial Forum. It's going to take place on June 7th. And we're going to be talking about money with Brian Dunhill from Dunhill Financial on that. And that's pretty much that in a nutshell. And now it's time for a Q&A. So feel free to ask me anything. And that's when I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Patty see what what we've got in the way of questions.
See what we have in the way of questions.
Yes.
We have a question from Marianne asking, do buyers typically have to offer the asking price? I will be a cash buyer. Will that give me an advantage?
Yes, cash is definitely an advantage because the sellers don't really want to go through, the contingency of a mortgage if they can help it, because they don't want to lose the sale, right? So that's an advantage. You don't have to offer asking price. If it's a property that's been on the market for a while and there isn't a lot of interest in it, then I would say definitely go for offering less. But if it's a hot property and there are others behind you, then I wouldn't take the risk. It's just not worth it. So it really depends on the property. But we get good information from the selling agents. They want to sell the property too. And so they'll let us know if, what's going to fly, what price will work. Okay.
Okay. So another question from Leander, which percentage of the purchase price does a bank normally finance? And how much are the additional costs for buying?
Good question. Okay, so the banks all have their own gig, okay? Every bank will offer something different, and it could be anywhere from 20 to 50% down. So in other words, 50 to 80% loan to value. And it really depends on the bank and the customer. The closing costs are what you have to watch out for. The notarial taxes and fees are about 7 to 7.5%. So it's expensive. Our fees will run about 3%. So you can pretty much figure you're going to have 10% in closing costs. Now, if we have a commission share with the selling agency, then we will refund that back to our client. So it's very possible that our client will end up paying only about 0.5% for us to do all the work. And it happens a lot in the South. It happens about 50% in the South, but never in Paris. The agencies in Paris are very independent and proprietary. They just won't do it.
One thing I was going to add to the answer about the mortgages, what they will lend to depends on the location of the property.
Yes, in today's world, different banks will lend based on the location. We find that it's very easy. It's easier to get a mortgage in the South right now and in Paris, but not in rural areas because it's a bigger risk for the bank. It's pretty simple. Yeah, they know what they've got as a commodity in Nice and in Paris, but in the other provinces, it's riskier for the bank.
There was a follow-up quick question on, excuse me, on mortgages, and it was more clarification. So you said under 60 years of age with not self-employed. What about retirees? Do they typically qualify? Or is that
well, that's the problem. Okay. Here's the reason. There is a life insurance policy that's mandatory to fully pay out the loan in the event of death. And the premiums for that policy, as they get older, get really not worth, right? So they want the loan to be completed by the time you're 75. That means that they don't want to lend beyond the age of 60. And then they don't want to lend if you're self-employed. And even though you have a pension, because you're older, you're just not their best customer. Right now, they can pick and choose, and they really only want to lend large sums of money to people who don't need the money. I mean, that's really unfortunate, and that's the way it works. Now, if you can get a line of credit on the U.S. side, like an equity release or something like that, based on your U.S. property, then you can certainly, that becomes cash in effect. It becomes almost a cash deal, but you will pay a higher percentage, a higher interest rate in the U.S. Okay.
Okay. Let's see, where do I want to go? Okay, this is from Julie. I plan on buying with cash, but my house here in the US hasn't sold yet. When should I start looking? Is it too early?
Well, that's kind of a bet you got to make. I mean, you can start looking now. But if you found the perfect property, you would need to commit to it. You could assume you could have it in 3 to 4 months. So the question is, can you sell your home in time to come up with the money? That's the risk. That's just
right.
There's no to sell it.
There's no cash needed when you make an offer.
Well, the only thing you need is the 10% to put down on the pre-sale agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So you need at least the 10%. But if you're stuck at the end, you would end up forfeiting that. You would default and end up forfeiting the 10%. So that's not a good idea.
I guess that begs the question too, what is the market like right now? Can you give us a little glimpse into, is it really hot? Are properties selling really fast? Or, the lead times could be longer if the properties are staying on the market longer, but what does it look like right now?
Well, it depends on where. I just wrote an article recently how all the major cities in France, the price of property is down with the exception of Nice. Nice is the only market where the price of property is up and there's hardly anything on the market and everything sells very quickly. And a big reason for that had to do with COVID. When COVID happened, Parisians left, and the Parisians that left, 64% of them went to this region, the region of Nice, the PACA region. And so it's really popular right now. And that's one reason that the prices in Paris are down. But that also means it's a really good time to buy because they're not going to stay that way. Paris is a non-risk market because it's finite. It can't go up and it can't go out. There are restrictions that they can't build above a certain level. And it's bordered by the peripherique, the outer rim road. So it's never going to be different. So, if you want to buy an old property in Paris, in central Paris, that is never going to go down value for any length of time. It's always going to hold. I mean, right now we've seen the prices be a little bit soft, but it's never going to plummet, never. And we've got, the Olympics are coming in 2024. So until then, now I don't know what's going to happen after, but, I think it's pretty hot up until the Olympics.
So on that note, we have a Paris-related property question. Is there more value in properties fully renovated or in properties that require major renovations, fix up? Which is a better value?
This is one of those ça dépend. This depends. Very often a developer will go in and renovate a property and do what I call whitewash it. They'll get it up to a saleable point and they'll sell it off and they'll make a lot of money on it. So you're paying for that, but maybe it's not exactly what you want. Maybe you need to go in and add some things or change some things because the work they did wasn't that great. They just want to whitewash it to resell it. Then you can buy a property that hasn't been touched for 30 or 50 years and it needs complete renovation, but you've paid a lower price for it. What we like to do is compare the price per square meter of the sale, add to it what the price per meter costs to renovate it. And if you end up at market value, then you're still doing great. And if you renovate it yourself, you can get it just exactly the way you want it. This image behind me is a photo of a property we recently completed in Nice. It's a fractional ownership property, which we developed. It was interesting because when I bought it from what's called a marchand de biens developer who flipped it. He didn't do anything to it. He paid a lot less for it than I paid for it, but it didn't matter to me because it was such a special property. And I still bought it at what I thought was a good price. And then we renovated it and almost spent as much money as what it cost to renovate it, because it's a fractional ownership property and it had to be perfect. Now, if it were for me, I don't know if I would have spent quite as much money, but it needed to be drop dead amazing, and it was. And because of it, we sold all the shares, 13 shares, in 5 days. So it was all worth it. And all the owners are thrilled and happy. And so, you know, sometimes you just have to kind of look at all the numbers and decide whether it's worth it to you or not. I'm a big believer that money is here on this earth for us to enjoy. It's not here on this earth for us to take with us in our coffins. And it's all about life and enjoying life, and we should spend it the way we want. But that's a personal philosophy of mine.
Okay, we have a couple questions about buying a property and using it as short-term rental.
Okay.
What are the laws around buying a property then using it for a short-term rental?
Okay, so the laws exist on the books for cities of 200,000 population or more. Every one of those cities gets to choose how it enforces those laws. That's all typical Napoleonic code. Paris has the strictest laws, which are that if it's a primary residence, that means if you live in it full time and you consider it primary and you're tax resident in France, then you can rent it short term up to 4 months a year without any problem. You just have to register it with the city. If it's not a primary residence, if it's a secondary residence, then you only have 2 choices. You can either rent it long-term, which is on a yearly basis, or on what's called a mobility lease, which is 1 to 10 months to someone who's there on business or education. You still have to register. I'm not sure you have to register that. No, you don't have to register that with the city.
I don't think so.
No, that you don't have to register with the city. But one of the caveats is that as a landlord, you're not allowed to take a security deposit on that kind of a lease, which I don't understand, but that's the way it is. In Nice, the laws are a little looser. You can rent short term for up to 6 years, even if it's a secondary residence, but you have to have permission of the building and permission of the city. So it can be a little bit challenging, but it's a little bit looser. In other areas, though, where the population is less than 200,000, then you don't have to comply with those laws and you can rent short term.
Okay, and we have a renovation question. How risky and or expensive is it to work with a contractor to remodel a property that needs renovation?
Well, I guess it could be risky if you didn't know who you were working with, but if you have one of our recommended designers and contractors, then it's not a risk. We work with Martine Di Matteo in Paris. She's fantastic. She's the best. And she's been managing these teams for 20 plus years. She's the one that did the apartment that you see behind me. She's amazing. And she's actually, I think she's way too cheap. I keep telling her that, but her work is gorgeous. And then you really get exactly what you want. And in the end, it's worth it. So again, you know, we've got the resources and we back them up.
And on that same topic, is there a ballpark figure for renovations in Paris per square meter?
We find that they tend to average about 3,000 or 3,500 euros per square meter for an entire renovation. You can spend less, you can definitely spend more. I have never spent less myself, but I want what I want. You know, when you're doing the work, okay? When you're doing the work, The labor is the most expensive aspect, not the materials. So you end up choosing beautiful materials because you're already doing the work. You're already in there. You don't want to redo it. So I would easily allow 3,000 euros a square meter. And I have to say, bathrooms and kitchens are what cost. That's what's the most expensive. Taking down walls is not a big deal. But the minute you touch a bathroom or kitchen, you're touching electricity, you're touching plumbing. You can't do just 1 or 2 rooms. Doesn't work. You end up doing the whole project. Now, as I said, this apartment behind me, this was a 54 square meter, 1-bedroom apartment with a separate kitchen that had not been lived in for 30 years. We took down every single wall, left nothing standing, turned it into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with an open kitchen. So you can imagine why it was expensive. We put in all new double, triple paned windows because it's on a pedestrian street filled with cafes and restaurants. And I said, it has to be absolutely quiet. It has to be the best windows money can buy. So we spent 60,000 euros on windows alone. So
how long did that renovation take? Such an extensive one.
It was amazing. 4 months.
4 months. Wow. Okay.
It was amazing. Yeah. Now that's Martine cracking her whip on the contractors.
Yeah.
But she was very well organized, and it really is beautiful. Those light fixtures that you see, those are green plastic water bottles with hand woven, I guess it's like raffia, around it. Those are, they're amazing. They weigh nothing. They're fantastic. They're really fantastic. Yeah. So those are the kinds of things you can do, when you've got a designer.
Yeah. I have a question I know you're going to like. Do you have experience and recommendations for buying a chateau?
That is called not a dream. That's called a nightmare. I do not recommend buying a chateau. If you buy a chateau, expect to spend at least 3 times what you paid for it in the renovation and the maintenance. You will spend your entire life dealing with that chateau. This is not for the faint of heart by any stretch of the imagination. I do not recommend doing that. No. I know everybody dreams of, being a châtelain or a châtelaine and having this gorgeous, magnificent chateau to live in and enjoy, but you'll be in the middle of nowhere. You'll have to get in your car to go get your baguette. You'll probably need a full-time gardener to take care of the grounds, and it's not a small endeavor. Do not do it. That's my advice.
Oh, and we have a couple questions about inheritance. Can you talk about the proper protocol to be able to pass the property to our children on death? Is that something handled at the time of purchase?
Well, we need a lifetime to talk about inheritance. Taxes in France are very expensive. The key is planning in advance and structuring the purchase correctly with the advice of the notaire or a tax attorney or us, in order to just make sure that you reduce the inheritance taxes as much as possible. I have another theory about this, however. It's when you're dead, and whatever happens, happens. And I know that we don't want to burden our children with expensive taxes so that they can keep their house. As a matter of fact, I am in the process of transferring the title of my own apartment in Paris to the name of my daughter, and I'm paying the notarial taxes and fees again, because every time you transfer title, you pay those again. But so that she will own it, so that when I die, she will not have any inheritance taxes to pay. but you can set the structure up from the beginning to make the most sense. I just didn't do it at the time because when I bought it 25 years ago, I wasn't thinking I would still have that property 25 years from then. And I didn't have necessarily good advice at the time either. I didn't have a me.
And is it possible to purchase properties in like an American LLC or corporation or
you can. There's a French SCI, which is the Société Civile Immobilière, and that enables you to buy in shares, so that it's one of the ways of getting around the inheritance laws. But that's a French company. You can also buy it in the name of a US company. Our fractional properties that we develop are purchased by a US nonprofit corporation.
Nonprofit
corporation. It's a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation. That is the structure we use. Okay. And so it is owned by a US company, and that is possible. Interesting. We've got 5 minutes. So
another question on that same note: can you purchase property in names of all your children plus you?
Yes, and the way to do that is through the SCI. Interestingly enough, though, the French require that the money for the purchase come out of the personal bank accounts of the buyers. So when you do that, the money has to come from all your kids' accounts. It's administrative, but it's manageable. Okay. Listen, everything in France is complicated. They are not happy if it is not complicated. Things are not simple. That doesn't mean that they're not, they're not doable. It just means that it helps to have, assistance along the way to get through it. It's just hurdles. It's just mechanical. That's all. We do it every day, so we don't think much of it, but.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, what else is interesting here? Well, we did have a couple. We had a couple healthcare questions about being eligible for healthcare. Do you want to just touch on that?
Well, if you come on a visa, if you get a visitor visa, then after 90 days of being in France, you can apply for PUMA, P-U-M-A, which puts you on the French healthcare system, which will pay up to 70% of your healthcare costs. And the healthcare costs are 1/10 of what they are in the US, and you're going to get 10 times better care. So I highly recommend it.
And residency and visas are a whole nother webinar.
Right, oh, right.
God, yes.
But you don't have to be a citizen to get healthcare.
No, and you don't have to own property to get healthcare. You just have to have a visa, and you do not have to have paid into the system to get it either. It is a right, not a privilege in France. Education and healthcare is a right, not a privilege. I can't say this enough.
There was one last question that I saw that I thought was interesting. Leander wrote, any tax discounts or incentives available for renovation regarding the older heritage properties? So I know in Italy, they have a lot of kind of upgrade type incentives and tax breaks. Do they have that in France as well?
For Chateau, they do, but they're still not worth it.
Okay. So even an older, even upgrading like you did the windows or something, is there any energy efficiency and that kind of thing?
Only when you sell the property for capital gains tax, those kinds of improvements can work to reduce your capital gains tax, but only if they're real improvements, not decorative.
Got it. Okay.
And my thought is too, any discounts for renovation, or if you're making your home more energy efficient, are for people who are living in and tax resident in France. So you would get the discount off your French income taxes. But if you have a second home and you're not a French taxpayer.
Right. Exactly.
And there was one more. So Adrian Leeds group, do you also handle kind of property management as well on the other side of the sale and renting or anything like that?
No, but we have people who do that and we can make recommendations. We used to, because we used to manage 35 short-term rental apartments, but we don't do that anymore. But we certainly have people we can recommend, but there's lots of people out there that do this.
Sure.
It's not a problem.
I have one more question just from me.
Okay.
And someone else kind of alluded, Muriel said, any smaller city locations in Auvergne-Rhône Alps you would recommend? And my question is, do you have, for not so city people, do you have any kind of medium to larger sized towns that you recommend looking at as well?
Oh, there are so many gorgeous places in France. I mean, the list is quite endless. Okay. Yeah. And that's kind of part of the problem in deciding where to live. I think if you go through that list and you check them off and you think, okay, climate, let's talk about climate. And at least you get into a region, right? Because that will help determine, where you really want to be. But I think there's just too many wonderful, amazing places in France. It's impossible.
Do you know of a quiz anywhere where you can enter all your details and it'll spit out some recommendations? That's what we need.
Well, again, they're all really different. So you just have to go and experience these towns and see what makes, because, for example, Strasbourg has that German influence. So maybe that's something you like or not like. I don't know. If you're in Menton, then you're going to have the Italian influence, and maybe like that. If you're in Collioure, Bordeaux, or Saint-Jean-de-Luz, that you're going to have more of a Spanish influence. So again, it really depends on you. And I highly recommend that people just come to France and travel around and see what they like and what feels good. It's, but I'm going to say it again before we get off. There is nothing quite like having immediate access to good transportation.
Yeah.
When you're in Nice, you can get on the tram and in 20 minutes be at the front door of the airport and go to Venice for the weekend. That is heaven on earth. And if you are out in the countryside, you're just not doing that. You're stuck. So it's a real, it's a serious decision you have to make of what kind of a lifestyle you want to have. That's the bottom line. Yeah. On that note, I guess we should say goodbye and thank you. So, Shannon, thank you so much.
Thank you. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to host you. I've been a fan for so long, and I blame you for my obsession with with Homes Abroad. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Patty, for all of your involvement as well.
Yes, thank you, Shannon.
Yeah, I think this was great. I hope everybody learned something. I'll follow up with the recording in an email to everyone who's registered. Thank you for all your great questions. And with that, we bid you adieu.
Well, thank you all. And I hope to see you all as new subscribers as well, and continue to be working with Shannon, because it's great that she offers all this fantastic information. It's fabulous.
It's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.